Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and in today's video, I'm gonna be going over which gym leaders are consistently the most difficult to defeat in every single main series Pokemon game. This should be obvious to most of you, but just in case it's not, the most difficult gym leader is not the one that has the highest level Pokemon. It's the one that players most commonly struggle to defeat at that particular point in their journey with the Pokemon that they have access to. How difficult a gym battle is a subjective thing that depends on many factors, but primarily what your team is. For example, Brock. If you started with Bulbasaur or Squirtle, he's very easy to defeat. But if you started with Charmander or you're playing Yellow, he's much more difficult. In short, the difficulty of a gym leader is a subjective metric that is based on people's opinions and experiences, not hard data. Therefore, I figured the best way to determine which one is the most difficult in every game is by letting you guys decide. My first step was narrowing down a particular game's gym leaders to just 2 to 4. This trimming was done based on my own personal experiences, somewhat, but primarily based on replies I got on social media. I would ask, hey, what do you think is the most difficult gym leader in this particular game? And the names that I saw the most often in the replies were the ones who made the cut. Then after I narrowed down the gym leaders, I ran several polls on my community tab asking you guys to vote on which gym leader you found the most difficult in any particular game. By doing this, the results for this video are not just my own personal experiences, but the experiences of the community as a whole. So if you disagree with any of these picks, I'm sorry, but you got outvoted. But now that I've explained my method, we can dive into the list. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and let's get started with the Generation 1 games, Red, Blue, and Yellow. First, I should list the gym leaders that I narrowed the poll down to, and those were Brock, Lieutenant Surge, Koga, and Sabrina. To explain the Brock pick, since I just used him as an example of a battle that's sometimes very difficult, but sometimes very easy, I figured for half of the Gen 1 starters, if he's difficult, then he should at least make the cut for the poll. So I ran the poll between these 4 gym leaders, and the results showed that Sabrina won in a landslide. And I must say, I absolutely agree with this. The main reason Sabrina is the toughest gym leader in Generation 1 is because of her type specialty. The Psychic type was ridiculously overpowered in Generation 1, probably the most overpowered any particular type has been in the history of Pokemon. There were multiple reasons for this. The first was that the Dark type just didn't exist yet. They created it in Gen 2 in order to make the Psychic type less overpowered. That means Psychic is down to having just 2 weaknesses, Ghost and Bug. However, in Generation 1, Psychic wasn't actually weak to Ghost, it was immune to it. It's widely believed this was an error in the game's coding, not intentional, because I'm pretty sure there's a character in-game that recommends using Ghosts against Bug-type Pokemon, but the end result is that in Gen 1, the Psychic type only had 1 weakness, and that was to the Bug type. And in Generation 1, the Bug type was garbage. The strongest Bug types, Pinsir and Scyther, literally learned no Bug type moves. That's because there were only 3 Bug type attacks in Generation 1, Leech Life, Pin Missile, and Twin Needle. Leech Life was atrociously weak, so it doesn't even matter. Then Pin Missile could max out at 70 base power if it hit 5 times. But it's only 85% accurate, so the chances of that happening are minimal. And then Twin Needle only has an effective base power of 50. Oh, and another important piece of information, Twin Needle could only be learned by Beedrill. Yeah, a Pokemon that not only has terrible stats, but is also weak to Psychic. In short, the only way to hit Psychic-type Pokemon with super effective damage using a Pokemon that is not also weak to Psychic is by using Pin Missile on a Jolteon, a Pokemon with terrible physical attack, so what's even the point? To beat Sabrina, you are forced to use neutral hits. So Sabrina's already got a massive advantage based purely on her type specialty, but then you look at her teams and they don't make things easier. This is her team from Red and Blue. Venomoth isn't a huge deal, but the other 3 all hit very hard with their Psychic type moves and have 2 ways to bolster their poor physical defense. Plus, in Generation 1, Special Attack and Special Defense or just one stat called Special. And all these Pokemon have good special stats, which means they hit hard with their psychic moves, but also will tank your special attacks really well. You pretty much have to use physical moves. Her team in yellow version looks easier to deal with because Venomoth and Mr. Mime were replaced by a pretty much useless Abra, but then you notice their levels. In red and blue, the level jump from Erica's strongest Pokemon to Koga's and Sabrina's strongest Pokemon was 14 levels. In yellow, that was increased to 18. Because of this ridiculous level jump, most players will be fighting Sabrina in yellow version with Pokemon that are a lower level than hers. And that, of course, makes it even harder. If you are somehow fighting Sabrina with level 50 plus Pokemon, I will be very impressed. So Sabrina is absolutely the toughest gym leader in red, blue, and yellow. And that wraps up Generation 1. But before we move on to Generation 2, I real quick want to let you guys know that I have some exciting new merch. Over on my second channel, MandJTV Plays, we just wrapped up a Pokemon battling league of just Metronome battles called the Metronome Battle Federation, and my team, the Houston Gastros, won the entire thing. To celebrate my glorious victory, for a limited time, I am selling Houston Gastros MBF Champions shirts. I made this design myself and I'm very proud of it, and I think it'll be a great way to support my awesome team as we try for back-to-back titles in Season 3 later this year. It will only be available for a limited time though, so if you want one, head to the link in the description or click the shirts below the video to pick one up as soon as you can. But anyways, back to the toughest gym leaders, let's move on to Generation 2, Gold, Silver, and Crystal. I should say up front that the toughest gym leader in these games, it's not gonna be any of the Kanto gym leaders because they're post-game battles. When you fight them, you have access to a fully evolved team with good, strong stab moves. You have pretty much no limits as to what Pokemon you can use on your team. Additionally, their levels are not that much higher than the Pokemon League's levels, so you don't really have to do a whole lot of training to match their levels. So overall, the post-game gym battles are just not as difficult as the Johto region gym battles. The first Johto gym leader I narrowed it down to was Whitney. While her Clefairy is a pushover, her Miltank is infamous. The other one I narrowed it down to was Claire. She is difficult by nature of using the Dragon type prior to the Fairy type being added. So you have very few options for super effective damage. Plus her strongest Pokemon, Kingdra, its only weakness is Dragon in Gen 2. These were the only two gym leaders I put into this poll because they're just on another level of difficulty compared to all the other Johto gym leaders. The results of the poll were Whitney winning in a landslide, and oh my god, I agree so much. Claire is certainly tricky, but the fact that she's the last Johto gym leader means that your team options to use against her are much larger. Whitney is only the third gym leader in the game, so your team options are not only very limited, but you're probably stuck fighting her with not fully evolved Pokemon. That's actually a big reason why her Miltank is so extremely difficult to beat. It has a base stat total of 490. 490! That's higher than Golem. And you have to fight this thing with Pokemon that are just about level 20. You are almost certainly fighting this Miltank with Pokemon that have a much lower base stat total. Plus, in addition to Miltank just being a stupid strong Pokemon at this point in the game, its moveset is one of the rudest movesets of any gym battle Pokemon out there. First is its stab move, Stomp. Not only does this hit very hard, but it can flinch you if Miltank moves first, which will happen a lot since Miltank is extremely fast. Next is Attract, another move that can prevent your Pokemon from even doing anything. Yes, it only works on male Pokemon, but your starter has an 87.5% chance to be male. Therefore, your strongest Pokemon, most likely, is getting put out of commission. Next is Milk Drink, which means this bulky Pokemon that takes only a little bit of damage at a time can heal itself back up even once Whitney has run out of potions. Then finally is Rollout, a move that gets so strong it can obliterate any Pokemon, even those that would resist the hit. Additionally, Miltank is a normal type Pokemon, which means its only weakness is the fighting type. And guess what? You have two options for fighting type Pokemon. The first option is the in-game trade Machop, which is pretty solid. Your other option is a Heracross, a Pokemon that does not learn a fighting type attack other than Counter at level 44. Sure, you could teach it Rock Smash, but the move is stupid weak in Gen 2. This means your only good option for stab super effective hits is the in-game trade Machop. And that's it. If you don't want to use that Machop, then you are stuck beating this Miltank with neutral hits, something which is very challenging to do against such a bulky Pokemon that can also immobilize you with half its moveset. Whitney and Miltank are hands down the most difficult gym battle in Generation 2, and I would argue the most difficult gym battle in all of main series Pokemon. It's why I hate Miltank so much. This battle is so stupid tough. Now it's time for Generation 3, starting with the Hoenn games, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. The teams that the gym leaders use differ between Ruby and Sapphire than Emerald, but spoiler alert, the end result is the same for all three. For Ruby and Sapphire, the gym leaders I narrowed it down to were Brawly, Watson, Norman, and Winona. For Emerald, I swapped out Brawly for Tate and Liza, since the addition of 2 extra Pokemon to their squad makes their battle a much bigger deal. However, that swapping didn't end up making a difference, because the winner of both polls by a large margin was Norman, which I agree with. Norman is difficult for multiple reasons. One of the first reasons is that he uses the normal type, which as I just mentioned is tough because while it can't hit you with super effective damage, it only has one weakness. Additionally, his battle is tough because it happens immediately after the previous gym battle with no new areas that are unlocked. Your only natural training between Flannery and Norman is Norman's gym trainers, which likely aren't enough to make up for the level difference between the two leaders. But what really makes Norman difficult are his slackings. Slacking has a base stat total of 670, which is the same as Groudon and Kyogre. The dude is using what is basically a legendary Pokemon, and in Ruby and Sapphire, he's got 2 of them. Now, of course, Slacking does have Truant, which means it can only move every other turn, which is good. Otherwise, this would be broken as hell. But even so, it's still a huge challenge because on the turns it can attack, it can absolutely decimate you with its base 160 attack stat. Meanwhile, you're gonna need a lot of turns to whittle down its HP due to its incredible bulk, which he can then easily cancel out with a potion or slack off. The presence of Facade also forces you to be careful about status conditions, and Yawn is always annoying to deal with. His Emerald team got rid of one of the slackings, but replaced it with a Spinda and Linoon. While Spinda isn't much of a problem other than Teeter Dance being annoying, if Linoon is able to get off a belly drum, it will sweep your team in devastating fashion. While this slacking no longer has slack off, it does have a citrus berry. Plus having counter means that if you hit it with a strong fighting attack that does a lot but isn't enough to KO, you'll be destroyed with double the damage back at you. Who'd have thought that normal type gym leaders, a typing that is normally subpar compared to the others, would end up being so freaking difficult? Next up are the remakes within Generation 3, Firered and Leafgreen. While I did not run a poll for these games specifically, I just ran a poll for toughest Kanto gym leader in general, I find it difficult to believe that anyone would disagree with me when I say that Sabrina is still the toughest gym leader. Sabrina's Gen 3 team is very similar to her red and blue team, with the main differences being in movesets and the addition of abilities. Overall though, it doesn't change drastically, with Alakazam still being there as the biggest threat. But the main reason Sabrina is still the toughest gym leader is that the Psychic type is still OP in Generation 3. Or should I say Generation 3 Kanto. It's not anywhere as OP as it was in Gen 1, but it's still overpowered in a Kanto playthrough specifically due to certain attributes of the Pokemon available to you in Kanto. There are still no Dark-type Pokemon in the Kanto region. When they added the Dark-type in Generation 2, they didn't retroactively give it to any Kanto Pokemon. So therefore, you just have no Dark-type options in a Kanto playthrough. Yes, you can have Dark-type moves like Crunch, but you're not getting a stab boost for any of them. The second reason is that the only Ghost-type Pokemon available to you is Gengar. Yes, they did fix the issue with Psychic type being immune to Ghost, so you can hit with Stab's super effective Ghost types, but Gengar is a Poison type and therefore is weak to Psychic. So if your Gengar doesn't outspeed and OHKO her Pokemon, your Gengar is dead. And the third reason, the bug type still sucks. The only ones with good base stat totals are Pinsir, Scyther, and Venomoth. Pinsir learns no bug type moves by level up still. Scyther's only bug move is Fury Cutter, which starts hopelessly weak and must hit consecutively to do any kind of decent damage. And Venomoth is both weak to Psychic, and its best bug move is Silver Wind, which is only base 60 power, and is a level 1 move, so you can't actually teach it to it. Plus, you're not getting non-stab bug moves either. The strongest bug move in Gen 3 was Megahorn, which, 1, isn't learned by any Kanto bug-type Pokemon, but for the Pokemon that do learn it that aren't bug-type, almost all of them learn it at too late of a level for it to be used for Sabrina. The only one that you could possibly use it on is Nidoking, who learns it at level 43, but guess what? Nidoking is weak to Psychic! Fun fact, while the strongest bug move in Gen 3 was Megahorn, the second strongest was Signal Beam, which could only be learned by 1, Volbeat, and 2, Dewgong. For who knows what reason. So while Sabrina in Firered and Leafgreen is easier to handle than she was in Gen 1, she's still the toughest gym leader in those games, simply due to being a Psychic type specialist in the Kanto region. Next is Generation 4, starting with the Sinnoh games, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. The gym leaders I narrowed it down to were Maylene, Wake, Fantina, and Volkner. I ran a poll between these 4, and Fantina won in a landslide, which I agree with. This is her team in Diamond and Pearl, and all 3 of these Pokemon are monsters. Her ace, Mismagius, has the lowest base stat total of the 3, and it's 495. Drifblim just does not die, both due to being bulky as hell and becoming harder to hit due to Minimize. And while Gengar isn't super OP because she uses its weaker physical attack, its speedy Confuse Rays can cause serious problems. Then of course is her ace, Mismagius, which is both fast and hits quite hard with its special moves, especially Shadow Ball, which can be devastating. But then in Platinum version, Fantina changed from being the 5th gym leader to the 3rd gym leader, which, in my opinion, made her even tougher. Duskull is her new tank, which doesn't pose an offensive threat, but is sneakily difficult to kill. If it burns your Pokemon that are there to use physical dark moves like Bite, you're in trouble. Then is Haunter, which doesn't have as good a stats as Gengar, obviously, but it's still very fast and has both Hypnosis and Confuse Ray, so get ready for even more status conditions. And then is Mismagius, which she has with the same moveset, berry, and base stat total, but at level 26! Dear God! This lower level is scarier because it's the same situation as Whitney's Miltank, albeit less severe. It is a high base stat total Pokemon that you have to fight with lower base stat total Pokemon. In Diamond and Pearl, you're fighting Fantina with a team that's in the mid-level 30s, and therefore most of them are probably fully evolved. But then in Platinum, you're fighting her with a team that's in the mid-level 20s, and therefore far fewer of your Pokemon are probably fully evolved. In the mid-30s, you may have a fully evolved starter. In the mid-20s, you definitely don't. In short, her Mismagius stayed the same while everything around it got weaker. Fantina is difficult in Diamond and Pearl, but she is extra difficult in Platinum. Next is Heartgold and Soulsilver, and unsurprisingly, Whitney is still the strongest gym leader. While the swapping of one of Claire's Dragonairs for a Gyarados made her easier, Whitney got harder. The first reason this happened is that her Miltank was given a Lumberry, meaning that if you want to cripple it with a status condition, you have to do it twice. The second is that now it has the ability Scrappy, which means the strategy of stopping Stomp with a Ghost type is out the window. Whitney's Generation 4 Miltank is the most difficult gym battle Pokemon in all of the main series, in my opinion. My correct opinion. Next is Generation 5, and the gym leaders vary quite a bit from Black and White to Black 2 and White 2. For Black and White, I narrowed it down to the triplets, Lenora, Elisa, and Drayden/Iris. For Black 2 and White 2, I narrowed it down to Roxy, Elisa, and Drayden. The winner for both polls was the same though, and that was Elisa. This makes sense to me. First off, she's an electric type gym leader, and the electric type can be difficult to deal with, because like the normal type, it only has one weakness, but it also has much more offensive power. There are 2 reasons Elisa is more difficult than other electric type gym leaders though. her flying types, and Volt Switch. In Black and White, all 3 of her Pokemon are very fast, so they're likely moving first. If you don't have a ground type, they'll Volt Switch, leave the field, and then have another one of them take the hit instead. You click a ground move on Zebstrika, it Volt Switches, and in comes Emolga, who's immune. You click a rock move on Emolga, it Volt Switches, and in comes Zebstrika, who is not weak to rock. Couple that Volt Switching strategy and limited access to rock and ground types this early in the game, and you have a pretty challenging gym battle. Her team in Black 2 and White 2 is easier to deal with since one Emolga was nerfed and the other one was replaced with a weaker Flaffy, but all 3 still know Volt Switch, and that strategy is still a giant pain. Next is Generation 6, starting with X and Y, and I must say, I personally didn't think any of the gym leaders in these games were very difficult to defeat, which is a big flaw with these games. So I was super dependent on the community response to figure this one out. Based on the replies to some tweets I posted, I narrowed down the gym leaders to Grant, Karina, and Valerie. And Karina won in a landslide. While I have never personally struggled with Karina, I can see why she's more difficult than the other Kalos gym leaders. All 3 of her Pokemon know Power-Up Punch, which can definitely get scary. Hawlucha is the scariest one though, because it's blazing fast and has very good physical attack. It also knows Flying Press, a move that is both strong and has a tricky type matchup mechanic that first-time players may not understand. These factors combine to create a potentially sweeping threat. Again, she's not particularly difficult compared to the other gym leaders I've discussed in this video. She's still the most difficult in Kalos because Kalos overall is pretty easy. Next is Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and the toughest gym leader is still Norman. While his team and therefore the difficulty of his battles stayed overall the same from Ruby and Sapphire, the gym leaders that finished behind him in the polls got easier. Wynona's Altaria lost Dragon Dance, which was the main reason she could be so scary, and Tate and Liza returned to just having 2 Pokemon. Next is Generation 7, starting with the Alola games, Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, and Ultra Moon. And these games don't have gym battles. They were replaced by Totem Pokemon battles and Grand Trials against Island Kahunas. I'll be covering who the toughest Kahuna is because they're very similar to gym leader battles, 1v1 single battles. Meanwhile, Totem battles are a whole different beast, and I figured it was just best to skip them for this video. If you want to know which Totem battle I thought was the most difficult in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, I have a whole video on that I made a few years ago that you can check out. For the toughest Kahuna, I simply ran a poll for the 4 of them. Didn't really need to narrow it down since there's just 4. I ran one poll for all 4 Alola games since their teams are very similar, and Nanu won in a landslide. My memory of these battles is a bit fuzzy since I haven't played through the Alola games since Ultra Sun came out, but based on the responses to this poll, it seemed the reason most people picked Nanu was because of his Alolan Persian. First off, it's got the Z Crystal, so that can be devastating. It also has Fur Coat, which halves the damage it takes from physical attacks. Since most fighting type attacks are physical, this basically cancels out one of its weaknesses. It carries Power Gem for coverage against bug types, and while it has no coverage for fairy or fighting types, it's blazing fast and can cause serious flinching problems with Dark Pulse. Overall, not as difficult as older gen gym leaders like Sabrina or Whitney, but I can still see why people picked him as the toughest one of Gen 7. Or should I say the Gen 7 Alola games, because we still have the Gen 7 Kanto games, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. I thought there was a chance that Koga might pass up Sabrina as the toughest Kanto gym leader, because in Let's Go, he has some really frustrating toxic protect stalling strategies on 3 of his 4 Pokemon, so I ran a poll between just the 2 of them, but nope, Sabrina still won and is still the toughest gym leader. To me, this makes sense. While the weak bug-type Pokemon problem has pretty much been completely remedied by this point, you're still limited in Ghost and Dark types. The only Ghost type is still Gengar, who is weak to Psychic, and there still aren't any Dark types. Okay, actually, that's not quite true. You can get other Ghost and Dark types via in-game trades. The in-game trades for Alola forms allow you to get some other Ghost and Dark type Pokemon, those being Alolan Raticate and Alolan Marowak in both games, then Alolan Muck in Let's Go Pikachu, and Alolan Persian in Let's Go Eevee. But that's it! You're still very limited in what Pokemon you can use that are good against Psychic type Pokemon, so while Let's Go Sabrina is probably the easiest to beat of all the various versions of Sabrina that we've discussed so far, she's still the toughest in Kanto. Finally is Generation 8, the games being, of course, Sword and Shield. Using my own experiences and replies to my questions, I narrowed down the toughest gym leaders in Sword to Kabu, Bee, Opal, and Raihan, then the same group, but swapping Bee for Alistair in Shield. I ran polls for both sets, and both times Raihan was massively victorious, which to me makes sense. Although before I discuss Raihan, I do want to say that my battle with Opal was the most unfair gym battle I've ever done because I got every one of her questions wrong. Because apparently I'm dumb. I can see why people didn't vote for Opal though, because if you get the questions wrong, the battle is unfair in her favor, but if you get them right, it's unfair in your favor, which can result in a very easy battle. Raihan is consistently the toughest gym leader in Galar for several reasons, but I think the biggest reason is that his battle is a double battle. Double battles are by nature tougher in playthroughs because your team isn't built for them. Your playthrough team likely doesn't know moves like Protect or Follow Me, because the vast majority of the time, they are useless in single battles, which are the battles that you've been doing your entire playthrough. However, in a double battle situation, they are staple support moves. But it's not just that your team lacks the right support moves, they also might have the wrong offensive moves. In the current VGC meta, most ground type attackers likely run high horsepower over Earthquake. High horsepower is weaker, but it makes it so players don't have to worry about hurting their own ally. But if you have a ground type Pokemon on your playthrough team and it can learn high horsepower and Earthquake, you're picking Earthquake every time. Pretty much all of your battles are single battles, and in a single battle, Earthquake is strictly superior to high horsepower because it's a 100% accurate physical ground type move with no secondary effects. It's just stronger. So if your ground type knows Earthquake, then you go into this battle with Raihan, you now have to worry about hurting your own ally. Whereas if all the battles were double battles, you probably would have taught it high horsepower. So you're already at a disadvantage because your team is not built for the double battle that you have to deal with, but then it gets even tougher because Raihan has a pretty good dedicated strategy, Sandstorms. All of his Pokemon take no damage from Sandstorms, and Gigalith even gets a special defense boost from it. Plus their movesets are excellent, with everyone but Duraludon having a move to cover one of their weaknesses. And while Duraludon doesn't have that, it's a frickin' Duraludon, it only has 2 weaknesses. Plus all 4 of its max moves have fantastic secondary effects, dropping your move's PP, boosting both his Pokemon's attack, boosting both his Pokemon's defense, or setting the Sandstorm back up if it's run out. Having to fight such a well-constructed team in a battle format that your squad isn't set up for makes Raihan's gym battle the toughest in Sword and Shield by a large margin. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon, who are helping support me during a time for the worst YouTube ad rates I have seen since becoming a YouTuber. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link is in the description below. And another way to support me is picking up the Houston Gastros Champions shirt. It's a really awesome shirt, it's a limited time, so pick one up while you still can. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, Poké fans, gotta catch them all.